Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Blackridge. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. In mid-1944, Blackridge was a remote rail junction on a seldom-used branch line, far from the bustle of major cities. The skies that summer were heavy with drizzle and low clouds, and the forested hills surrounding the station seemed to press inward with silence. Locals spoke in hushed tones that the line was cursed, that trains sometimes ran without explanation, past dead tracks. Into this setting rolled the Blackridge transport, a rust-stained steam engine, pulling precisely 47 dark sealed cars. Its cargo purportedly was prisoners, among them ordinary convicts, political detainees, and some suspected spies. None of the documents confirm exactly why so many were loaded at once. County records from nearby Agnes County note the arrival of the train in the dead of night, its wheels screeching on wet rails, a procession of shadows, each man shackled and silent. The station master, Harold Ledge, later wrote in his journal, "I counted them in the lamplight, 47, but the doors never opened for me." The cars bore no placards, and only one guard car rode at the rear, its windows barred. Word spread quickly to the hamlets around Blackridge that something was amiss, but no one dared approach. Among the scarce local reports is a testimony by Mrs. Irene Braskin, who lived in a cottage a mile off the tracks. Late that night she claimed she heard low moans, metallic dragging, and the hiss of steam. She reported to the county constable, "I thought the earth itself trembled with their pain." That fragment is one of the few hints that the prisoners were alive then, not just corpses in transit. A few days later, the train was officially noted as departing Blackridge Station, heading north. But in the registry, the destination is left blank. Inspectors later found the track onward had been sabotaged, rails twisted, ties torn, consistent with partisan sabotage methods recorded during the war. Railway sabotage was a frequent tactic by resistance groups during World War II, aimed at disrupting transport lines. Wikipedia. Yet even that does not explain what became of the 47 inside. Midway through that journey, a telegram reached the regional rail superintendent. The train had vanished from the schedule altogether. No signals, no reports at intermediate stations. In that same week, rumors circulated of a derailed train east of Blackridge, though no wreckage was confirmed. A clerk at the junction office, Simon Wells, later mentioned in his affidavit that the logs were wiped clean that very night. The train's trail went cold. In reconstructing this case, I drew upon the pattern of the lost train from Germany's wartime transports, where a prisoner train from Bergen-Belsen vanished from its intended route and re-emerged abandoned near Tröbitz. Wikipedia +2 HI Sepran Nyem +2. That precedent provides one skeleton for what may have occurred in Blackridge, but our case deviates in key ways. For weeks after the disappearance, the Blackridge station became a site of quiet dread. The rail office shutters were kept drawn, and the telegraph line, usually clattering with routine signals, remained unnervingly silent. Constable Avery Knox led a brief inquiry, though even his official notes survive only in fragments. One entry reads, "Engine number 3271 accounted for, tender returned empty. Human cargo unlisted." The first formal witness statements came from two linesmen, Roderick Hames and Ellis Farn. They had been sent to repair a downed section near Hollow Glen about 6 miles north. Both swore they saw a low black train idling in the fog, yet when they reached the site the following morning, the track was clear, no soot, no oil, no prints of boots or wheels. Only a single chain link lay half buried in the mud. In the county archive, a surviving telegram dated September 14th reads, 47 prisoners transferred by order of Central Command. Do not disclose destination. Yet the signature line has been burned away, leaving nothing but a blot of ink. That scrap, preserved in a brittle folder labeled Blackridge Transport Case Number 12B, remains the only document with an official stamp. By early 1945, whispers reached the nearby town of Meryton. Farmers there reported lights gliding along the disused spur at night, accompanied by faint clanking, as if iron were dragged over stone. Locals began calling it the Echo Train. One old herdsman, Walter Keane, claimed that on misty mornings his cattle refused to cross the bridge toward Blackridge. "They hear it before we do," he told a provincial reporter. During a wartime inspection, a regional officer, Captain Ulrich Fenn, was tasked with tracing missing convoys. His surviving report mentions Blackridge only once. Train 47B presumed redirected east. Contents undisclosed. The tone suggests bureaucratic fatigue, not malice. Still, the omission is chilling. The story might have faded into rumor if not for post-war reconstruction efforts. When engineers reopened the branch line in 1951, they unearthed corroded fragments of rail stock dated that same summer of 1944. Nearby, in a shallow trench, were remnants of cloth straps, fragments of boot leather, and what appeared to be the skeletal frame of a transport latch. Nothing proved the presence of bodies, but the alignment of the trench matched the curvature of the missing section. Historians later compared the event to what happened with the lost train, described in wartime German records, a convoy that vanished for days before discovery near Trobitz, filled with prisoners who had perished in transit. That haunting parallel, noted in academic reviews decades later, kept the Blackridge mystery alive in historical circles. Even now, a faint, rusted sign stands near the overgrown siding. The lettering is nearly erased, but in the right light you can still read. By the winter of 1945, the official stance was silence. The Ministry of Transport closed the Blackridge branch for repairs and decontamination, though no reports describe what contamination meant. The villagers, who had once gathered near the tracks to trade coal and grain, began avoiding the station altogether. A shopkeeper named Clara Rowan recalled years later that the snow never settled right on those rails. It melted in lines like something warm passed. Underneath, parish records from the nearby St. Matthias Chapel mention a brief memorial, service held for the departed, whose bodies were not returned. The register lists only initials, HB, FC, AN, and others. Some scholars have suggested that these may have been guards or clerks rather than prisoners, implying that even the custodians of the train never reappeared. In the early spring thaw of 1946, a salvage team combed the area near Blackridge Junction. They discovered a derelict maintenance shed containing scorched telegraph wire, bent crowbars, and a box of numbered tags, each stamped with property of Central Prison Authority. The highest tag number was 47. No human remains were found, though several workers reported an odor like iron and decay lingering. Inside the shed for weeks afterward, newspapers briefly touched on the incident under vague headlines like "Train Lost in Transit" or "Prison Convoy Mislaid." The stories were quickly retracted, replaced with bland corrections claiming clerical error. One anonymous editorial in the North County Herald posed the question, how can 47 souls vanish when steel rails have only one direction? The issue was never followed up. Around that same period, the historian and railway archivist Dr. Lyle Hesterman began comparing the sparse notes from Blackridge with those of a similar wartime event, the so-called lost train documented in German archives. He noted eerie consistencies, the timing, the secrecy of the orders, and the complete disappearance of both prisoners and escort personnel. In one of his letters, Hesterman speculated that Blackridge may have been an unrecorded twin to that tragedy, though operating under a different jurisdiction. Villagers said Hesterman stayed briefly at the old inn across from the tracks in 1952. During his visit, locals claimed he spent nights by the siding, listening. The innkeeper's widow later told interviewers that he left abruptly one dawn, leaving behind only a journal entry. There are still voices between the trees when the wind carries north. The story, already fading into rumor, might have ended there if not for the appearance of one peculiar artifact, a battered pocket watch found in the ashes of a signal post fire in 1955. Engraved inside was the name E. Farn, matching one of the linesmen who first saw the phantom train a decade earlier. The hands of the watch were fused at 2:17, though no one ever confirmed whether that marked the time of his death, or the last moment the Blackridge train was seen moving. The discovery of Farn's watch reignited local fear. Within weeks, the townspeople revived old talk of the vanishing rails. A retired porter named Jonas Peake claimed that, on certain nights, he could hear the faint chug of a locomotive moving through the valley. though the line had been torn up years earlier. "It doesn't sound like iron on iron," he told an interviewer. "It's more like breathing, long and steady." When the Regional Constabulary reopened their wartime archives in 1956, they found that almost every document relating to Train 47B had been reclassified and relocated to a closed military annex. Requests for access were denied. One clerk, who spoke off record, stated that the orders bore the signature of a colonel later transferred to foreign security operations. Even the map of the line was altered, several miles of track simply erased from post-war surveys. The surviving residents of Blackridge felt they were being asked to forget. In the parish ledger, whole pages from the 1944-45 entries were torn away. Father Ransom, who tended the chapel at the time, reportedly burned his homilies and resigned, leaving only a note in Latin, "Inter ferrum et umbras, Deus tacet." Between iron and shadows, God is silent. Around this time, railway historians abroad began taking notice. A small symposium in Oslo discussed unexplained prisoner transports during the war. Among the references was a footnote to the German lost train case, noting that at least one similar event was rumoured to have occurred in an unnamed British territory. Though the report stopped short of naming Blackridge, the time and number of prisoners matched precisely. That connection breathed new life into the story. The London Bureau of Historical Recovery dispatched an investigator, Miss Eleanor Trask, to review surviving Blackridge papers. Her field notes, now preserved in the county library, paint a grim picture. She described a silence of habit, not of ignorance, suggesting that locals knew more than they dared record. She also remarked on a recurring phrase in oral testimonies, "the train that never cooled." Trask traced several missing freight entries to a private contractor called Holden & Sons Transport. Dissolved shortly after the war, its ledgers list materials, fuel, and an unspecified human consignment for August 1944. Every related invoice bears the same rubber stamp, "Return to Central Authority." None are signed. Halfway through her inquiry, Trask wrote a brief report comparing her findings to the documented lost train discovered near Trobitz. She noted how that transport too was recorded under false destinations, its passengers left to die in sealed cars. "What if," she wrote, "Blackridge was the shadow we never found?" A week later, she boarded the evening train back to London. Witnesses say she looked pale and exhausted, clutching a leather folder. The conductor remembered her asking only one question before departure. "Do you ever hear it whistle when no train passes?" Miss Trask's folder was received by the London Bureau on October 8, 1956, but its contents were curiously incomplete. The official inventory lists 12 documents. Only 7 arrived. The missing pages reportedly contained her field sketches and annotations about a secondary track south of Blackridge. What remained were typed summaries and a few photographs blurred, images of rail fragments, scorched timbers, and one indistinct silhouette framed in mist. In the surviving correspondence, Trask mentioned visiting the family of Constable Avery Knox, the officer who led the first inquiry in 1944. His daughter, then in her 40s, claimed her father returned from those searches, a different man, quiet, jumpy, waking at the sound of whistles. She remembered one night when he burned his uniform in the yard and buried the ashes. "He said something followed him home from the line," she recounted. When Trask asked what he meant, the daughter said only, "He stopped talking after that." By 1957, the Bureau closed its investigation, citing lack of evidence. Yet strangely, the case drew the attention of a group of independent researchers led by Dr. Hesterman once more. Having studied the German lost train, he began a comparative analysis of both disappearances. His lectures, now archived in university collections, proposed that these incidents reflected the systemic erasure of human cargo during late war evacuations. He never claimed supernatural elements, only the bureaucratic precision of disappearance. "Records vanish faster than bodies," he told his students. In a letter dated March 1958, Hesterman wrote, "Blackridge remains my blank page, the space between evidence and memory. The rails there seem to have carried more than freight." His wording suggested deep unease, yet he continued to pursue the story. Locals recalled him returning to the area that summer, renting a bicycle and visiting old farm tracks that once paralleled the line. He took soil samples, measured rust patterns, and sketched the layout of the vanished junction. A farmer named Joseph Ellery later told reporters he found Hesterman's discarded notebook under a fence post. Inside were short, hurried notes. Signals still respond. Telegraph clicks at 2 a.m., no operator. Beneath that, a final entry in darker ink. Heard voices in sequence, counted to 47. Hesterman never published his findings. In 1959, his university announced his resignation due to ill health. He was not seen again in public records after that year. The county's last official statement on the Blackridge incident appeared in a local gazette that December. Rail reconstruction postponed indefinitely due to soil instability. Engineers, however, reported no such problem. They simply refused to work the stretch after sunset. Even today, those who walk the overgrown trail say the earth there feels hollow beneath their feet, like iron buried shallow, waiting to stir again. By 1960, what remained of Blackridge was more ghost town than settlement. The rail office windows were boarded, weeds pierced through the old platforms, and a rusted signal arm hung frozen at stop. The ministry no longer listed it on official maps, yet letters occasionally arrived addressed to station master. Blackridge Junction. The postal clerks forwarded them anyway, ritual, not reason. That same year, a team of civil engineers surveying for a new power line stumbled upon an unrecorded tunnel a mile from the main track. The entrance was half collapsed, hidden under brambles and limestone debris. Inside, they found decayed crates stamped army supply and, more disturbingly, a bent iron door frame that looked as if it had been forced from within. No records mention follow-up excavation. The tunnel was resealed within days. Local rumor insists the team's foreman refused to continue. His name, according to county notes, was Bernard Wykes. When later questioned, he said, "It wasn't what we saw, it was what we heard behind the wall." He never elaborated. Within months, he left the region for good. In 1961, a university researcher named Dr. Lydia Roma published a comparative paper on lost wartime convoys. She referenced the lost train incident near Trobitz to illustrate how entire prisoner transports could vanish due to chaos and poor documentation in the war's final months. In her commentary, Roma cited an English parallel known locally as the Blackridge vanishing, a subtle acknowledgement that our story had become folklore even among historians. Her analysis traced how both cases shared bureaucratic erasure, forged manifests, unnamed guards, and absence of final reports. Yet the Blackridge episode remained unique for one reason. No survivors ever surfaced, no wreckage confirmed, no graves found. That winter, snow returned heavier than usual. The few remaining villagers swore they heard whistles drifting across the valley at dusk, though the last physical rail line had been dismantled years prior. "It's not the wind," said one farmer. "It's the sound of a train searching for the rest of its passengers." In the county library's last surviving interview transcript, an aging telegraph operator recalled how, "On quiet nights the line still clicked faintly. Sometimes it spells numbers," he said. "I wrote them down once. It counted to 47 and stopped." Roma revisited the site in 1963 for her follow-up research, but found the area fenced off under a government land survey project. She later wrote, "History repeats itself when we refuse to acknowledge its gaps." In a footnote, she once again mentioned the lost train, reminding readers that disappearance during wartime was not anomaly but design. To this day, the valley around Blackridge remains uninhabited, and even birds seem to avoid nesting along its cold embankments. By 1964, the Blackridge case had become more legend than record. Government archives referenced it only obliquely, labeling the files transport discrepancies. Local memory, however, refused to fade. The few remaining villagers, farmers, widows, and an aging telegraph operator, spoke of faint rhythmic sounds in the soil after nightfall. "It's like something mechanical breathing," one said, as though the ground remembers the weight. During that same period, an amateur historian named Martin Kell began assembling a private collection of documents about vanished wartime convoys. In his journals, later published posthumously, he devoted an entire section to the Blackridge Manifest. He compared it directly with the lost train near Trobitz, noting how both incidents occurred under collapsing regimes and shared one eerie feature: neither train ever reached its supposed destination. Kell wrote, "Erasure was not an accident. It was the last form of control." In the summer of 1965, Kell visited the remnants of Blackridge himself. He described the scene in one entry. "The air feels heavier here, as if saturated with soot that never settled. The platform boards are soft, but when stepped on they ring hollow, as though something beneath them listens." His sketches, still stored in a private archive, show faint outlines of parallel rail imprints extending into a wooded ravine, where no official track ever existed. The Ministry of Land Reclamation, citing safety hazards, ordered the area fenced off soon after Kell's visit. Within months, his collection was confiscated for security review. Though some materials were returned to his family decades later, the section labeled Blackridge Transport remained sealed. When asked why, a ministry spokesman simply replied, "Some records belong to no one." That autumn, a group of hikers reported seeing light flicker in the valley, a dull amber glow that moved rhythmically before vanishing. Searchers found no campfire traces, only a melted metal rod near the old embankment. Its alloy matched the type once used in 1940s rail coupling pins. Her regional paper ran the brief headline, "Old Tracks Stir at Blackridge," before the article was abruptly withdrawn. The editor later admitted receiving a polite warning from higher offices advising silence. By the late 1960s, Blackridge was absent even from county maps, replaced by a blank patch labeled Restricted Woodland. Yet some maps, archival reprints from pre-war years, still depict the station clearly, along with a faint dotted spur marked Auxiliary Route 47. When interviewed in 1969, Kell's widow said her husband never recovered from what he found or didn't find there. His final note before his sudden passing read, "The rails don't end, they wait." By 1970, the Blackridge region had been formally abandoned to nature. The last family left that spring, leaving behind only a handful of intact structures: the signal house, the telegraph hut, and the skeletal remains of the platform canopy. Officially, the site was designated as part of a forest restoration zone, yet no replanting ever occurred. Even today, the aerial photographs show only a scar of darker soil tracing the path where the line once ran. That same year, a small documentary crew from the Midlands Historical Society requested permission to film the area for a wartime archival project. Their footage, never released publicly, was later described in internal memos as unusable due to interference. Sound engineers noted a persistent rhythmic pulse beneath the audio track, repeating every 20 seconds like the echo of a slow piston. One technician claimed that when he amplified the signal, he could faintly hear the clatter of chains. The crew's leader, Harold Densham, later wrote a letter to his colleagues saying, "We were alone there, but we kept hearing the signalman's bell ring from inside the empty tower." He described walking up the stairs to find nothing but a rusted frame swaying in still air. The report was filed and quietly shelved. Not long after, local councilman Edgar Moss petitioned to demolish the remaining station to discourage trespassers. His motion failed, but within weeks, a fire gutted the structure. Witnesses described no lightning or storm that night, only a flash that looked like burning magnesium. The fire brigade arrived to find the flames oddly contained, as though the blaze had obeyed boundaries of an invisible platform. In the ashes, investigators recovered a melted brass plate reading "Property of the Prison Transport Service." The following winter, a historian from Leeds named Professor Howard Silt revisited the Blackridge case as part of a study comparing wartime disappearances across Europe. He again cited the lost train from German records, noting that such erasures were not uncommon during 1944-45, when documentation collapsed under retreat. Yet in an interview, Silt admitted that Blackridge stood apart. "The difference here," he said, "is that there were no survivors to remember, and yet the memory remains louder than the facts." Silt's paper rekindled academic curiosity, but also renewed local discomfort. The few who still lived nearby warned researchers not to stay past dusk. A forester named Nolan Pike told one student, "After sunset, the trees whistle back. You think it's wind until you hear the rhythm." To this day, when storms roll through the valley, old-timers say you can still glimpse faint glimmers along the former track, like lanterns swinging slowly through fog, moving nowhere but never stopping. By 1972, Blackridge existed only as a footnote in forgotten transport ledgers. The valley itself was fenced off, and the government quietly reclassified it as environmentally unstable terrain. Few questioned this, though old engineers knew the soil there was solid clay, not prone to sink or flood. Still, the barrier served its purpose, to keep people out and perhaps something else in. A pair of university students from Bristol, Thomas Ellery and Mara Dent, slipped through that fence in late autumn to document what they called industrial hauntings of wartime Britain. Their surviving tape recordings, now archived at a local museum, capture muffled steps, the sound of rain and a faint rhythmic hum. Midway through the recording, Thomas is heard whispering, "It's counting. 41, 42. The reel ends abruptly. Neither student was reported missing, but they refused to speak publicly afterward. Mara later said in an interview, "It was just old metal creaking. That's all." She never elaborated. Around that same year, construction records show a brief proposal to lay a new freight line cutting near the old Blackridge route. Within 2 months, the proposal was withdrawn. Notes from the ministry's planning committee include an odd remark: magnetic interference exceeds permissible limits, origin unclear. Meanwhile, the story began spreading through railway enthusiasts and historians' circles again. Their periodical, Steam and Steel Quarterly, ran a small feature titled The Vanished Convoy of 44. The author, referencing the lost train case once more, argued that Blackridge was likely a logistical phantom, a train ordered but never built, a bureaucratic duplication. Yet even he admitted that witness statements contradicted that notion. People saw it, he wrote, and heard it. Bureaucracy can't make steam whistle. In local folklore, the site evolved into something darker. Parents warned children not to follow the fence line. Hikers reported chills and nausea near the collapsed tunnel entrance. One fisherman claimed he heard the clang of chains from beneath the frozen river nearby. When investigators checked the area, they found the ice cracked in a straight line, as if scored by iron wheels. By 1975, a regional newspaper revisited the story under the headline, "The Blackridge Line Still Breathes." The article quoted an unnamed railway worker who claimed to have seen faint light under the soil where the tracks once lay. "It pulses like heat," he said. You step near it and your pocket watch stops ticking. That same year, an archivist revising war transport files noted that several pages labeled Blackridge Prison Manifest 47 had been replaced by photocopies bearing faint grey bands, as though the originals had been overexposed. In a margin, someone had penciled, "Records erased before delivery." Whatever happened on those rails, it seemed history itself was complicit in helping it disappear. By the late 1970s, the Blackridge mystery had become a whisper traded in railway circles and history forums, half dismissed, yet never quite gone. A small group of enthusiasts calling themselves the Iron Chronicle Society claimed to have obtained fragments of the original 1944 manifest. Their leader, Peter Halverson, stated in a 1978 interview that the papers were rescued from a government disposal depot before being incinerated. What remained were brittle ledger pages listing numbers, no names, and a handwritten note at the bottom, 47 secured. Do not log twice. Halverson tried to verify the find by cross-referencing records from nearby depots, but every serial number led to blank entries. As if, he said, someone scrubbed the people but left the arithmetic. The society folded the following year after Halverson's sudden death in a house fire. His colleagues said he'd grown obsessed with a particular pattern of scratches on one document that, under magnification, resembled rail lines curving toward nothing. Meanwhile, a series of letters surfaced in the possession of Professor Lydia Roma, who had studied both Blackridge and the lost train in her comparative work. One letter, dated 1979, came from a retired German archivist who believed that both incidents were not separate events, but reflections of a single administrative experiment in relocation. His wording was cautious, but he included a striking sentence. They hid them by moving them endlessly, until the records outlasted the bodies. Roma never published that correspondence. When she died in 1982, her papers were sealed by the university, citing sensitivity. Among them, however, a small envelope remained open. Inside was a faded photograph showing a line of empty rail cars in deep fog. Stenciled faintly on one was the number 47. Around this time, Surveyors inspecting the valley for a new electrical substation reported unusual readings. Their instruments registered low-frequency vibrations emanating from underground, steady, rhythmic, like the turn of an engine. Geological experts attributed it to trapped groundwater, though one inspector, Niall Mercer, insisted the sound had a metallic signature. His written note in the site log was brief: "It's not water, it's waiting." When night fell, Mercer stayed behind alone to finish mapping. He never returned to his tent. Search teams found his lantern and compass near the collapsed tunnel, but no sign of him. His wristwatch, recovered weeks later, was frozen at 2:17, the same time as the pocket watch found years before. After that incident, the substation project was abandoned, and official access to the valley was permanently restricted. Signs went up warning of unstable terrain and toxic runoff. No such contamination was ever confirmed. Still, on quiet nights when mist rolls down from the moor, residents of distant hamlets swear they hear the echo of metal wheels turning deep beneath the ground, each rotation slower than the last, as if dragging the memory of its own disappearance. In the spring of 1983, the Blackridge Valley was briefly reopened for geological assessment, following a minor landslide that exposed part of the old railbed. What the inspection team discovered reignited debate across the region. Beneath layers of compacted soil, they found a section of track perfectly preserved, steel bright as if laid yesterday, uncorroded despite 4 decades underground. "It gleamed," wrote the chief surveyor in his report, "not rusted, not aged, as though time itself had forgotten to pass here." Alongside the rail were small fragments of glass and enamel tags, bearing faint numerals, some matching those from the 1944 manifest. When the find was brought to local authorities, the evidence was quickly removed and sent for special study in London. None of it was ever catalogued again. Later that same year, a local journalist named Maren Voss began piecing together a documentary on the case. She interviewed aging witnesses, reviewed old telegrams, and revisited the writings of Dr. Hesterman and Professor Romer. Her narration style was calm and forensic, avoiding sensational claims, but threading her work with quiet dread. In one of her recordings, she remarked, "The lost train of Trobits had survivors to tell its story. Blackridge had none. That's the difference between history and haunting. One is written, the other is whispered." During her research, Voss uncovered references to a small prison transit command depot that operated briefly in 1944, just 30 miles from the Blackridge line. Its records were destroyed during the war, but neighboring counties listed fuel requisitions consistent with a single large convoy that never returned. The timing aligned exactly with the Blackridge disappearance. Midway through her investigation, Voss began receiving unsigned letters. One warned her to leave the dead to their schedules. Another included a clipping of a train timetable with every entry after August 1944 blacked out. Undeterred, she pressed on. Locals recalled seeing her near the fenced valley that autumn, photographing the terrain. When she didn't appear at a conference days later, her colleagues assumed illness. Weeks passed before her camera was found at the edge of the embankment, the film inside exposed but fogged beyond recovery. In her apartment, investigators discovered a final note on her desk, found the siding, 47 markers in a row, no rails above them. Once again, the ministry cited safety hazards and sealed off the area. Journalists who inquired about her disappearance were told she had relocated abroad. No passport records confirmed that. For historians who followed her trail, the comparison to the lost train remained the only surviving frame of reference, proof that history could, under certain pressures, erase an entire journey without trace, leaving only questions that multiplied like echoes. To this day, the locals say the valley sometimes hums after rainfall, a vibration you can feel through your shoes, steady and patient, as if something vast beneath is waiting for another signal to depart. By 1985, Blackridge had become less a physical place and more an idea, a cautionary tale whispered among archivists and railwaymen. Its files were referenced in footnotes, stripped of context, cited only as the vanished transport case. Still, fragments surfaced occasionally, passed quietly between historians like contraband. One such item was a rusted badge engraved with the initials TR, found in a box mislabeled Signal Parts, 1944. Tests later confirmed traces of human skin oil embedded in the metal, suggesting it had been handled recently before burial. In that same year, the Royal Historical Review published an article revisiting the wartime convoys, invoking the lost train once again. The author, Dr. Simon Clay, argued that Blackridge represented an intersection of logistics and myth, a moment where the machinery of war consumed its own evidence. His tone was academic, yet the closing lines carried unease. When the record fades faster than memory, something deliberate is at work. Clay later confided in colleagues that he planned a field visit to verify the site's layout before finalizing his paper. His diary, recovered after his sudden death from accidental exposure, contained sketches eerily similar to those of Hesterman and Voss, a serpentine track descending into forest shadow, ending at a curved wall marked by deep scorches. One line from his final entry reads, "I heard a whistle without wind." In 1986, construction crews installing new telecommunications lines near the restricted zone reported tools vanishing overnight. They also noted their compass needles twitching violently near the trench. One worker, frightened by the sound of metal shifting underground, refused to return. His supervisor filed a report but received a peculiar reply stamped "archived without action." That winter, a violent storm uprooted several trees along the ridge, revealing sections of iron rail glinting under lightning. Locals who ventured close said the air smelled faintly of burned oil. A farmer named Graham Wells, whose family had lived in the region for generations, told an interviewer, "It's been 40 years, and still it breathes. You think it's overgrown, but it's just buried alive." By 1987, county officials finally declassified portions of wartime railway correspondence. Among them was a telegram addressed to a Colonel H. Sloan, ordering the termination of Route 47B effective immediately. The timestamp matched the week the Blackridge train vanished. The line beneath the signature, though faint, appeared to read, "Cargo acknowledged, no returns expected." After that revelation, historians drew the inevitable connection. Blackridge was not an isolated mystery, but a deliberate erasure, an event designed to vanish, with the same bureaucratic precision seen in the lost train tragedy. Yet unlike Trobit's, there was no liberation, no discovery, only the echo of movement that never reached its end. Today, hikers who trespass near the valley claim they sometimes feel a subtle vibration underfoot, as if something enormous and buried turns slowly in its sleep, waiting for the signal that never came. By the end of the 1980s, the name Blackridge no longer appeared on any map. The coordinates were replaced by a forestry code, and the access road was redirected. Only a few aging railway historians still kept its legend alive in correspondence, often referring to it obliquely as the Silent Junction. Among them was Dr. Miriam Easton, an archivist from the University of Edinburgh, who had inherited several of Dr. Romer's sealed documents. Easton's letters, later compiled into a private collection, reveal her growing obsession with parallels between Blackridge and the lost train of Trobit's. She argued that both cases exposed how bureaucracies could make people disappear with paperwork instead of violence. But privately, her tone shifted. In a letter to a colleague dated 1988, she wrote, "I think the ledger itself resists being read. The ink fades overnight, the numbers reorder themselves. Every time I count, there are still 47. That same year, she arranged a field visit under the guise of environmental surveying. Her field assistant, Henry Cole, recounted that as they approached the overgrown embankment, their instruments began to malfunction. The compass spun, he said, and the tape recorder played back sounds we hadn't made, shuffling, coughing, a chain dragging. Easton described the landscape as eerily untouched. The air felt dense and humming. They discovered remnants of a signal post buried under moss, its brass bell intact. When struck, it produced a deep, muted tone that echoed far too long, like a resonant chamber beneath the soil. "There's space under us," Cole whispered in his account, "like hollow tunnels running forever." That evening, Easton wrote her final field note. "I believe we're standing above the siding they built to forget." She intended to return with ground-penetrating equipment, but the project was halted after local authorities declared the area unsafe due to subterranean instability. Weeks later, Easton vanished en route to a conference in York. Her car was found abandoned on a rural road 50 miles away. Inside, investigators discovered a single sheet of paper, an old train schedule dated August 17, 1944. The only legible words were Blackridge Junction, manifest complete. Following her disappearance, the university sealed her notes. A short obituary called her a passionate historian, lost to the fog of history she studied. Among peers, however, whispers persisted that her field recordings, never publicly released, contained something extraordinary. One librarian who had heard them described a rhythmic rumble that fades in and out, like something circling beneath the ground. In 1989, an anonymous article appeared in the Historical Inquirer, titled Trains That Never Stopped. It quoted Easton's unpublished words and closed with a chilling observation referencing the lost train. In Trobitz, the dead were found. In Blackridge, only the whistle remains, and sometimes it answers. By 1990, the Blackridge Valley was officially declared a restricted conservation zone, ostensibly to protect its delicate wetland ecosystem. Those who lived nearby knew there was no wetland, only the same dense undergrowth and rusted stone that had marked the valley for decades. The restriction, they said, wasn't to preserve anything, but to prevent disturbance. That spring, a team of contractors hired to reinforce the perimeter fence reported strange issues with their machinery. Welding torches sputtered, engines cut out mid-operation, and the metal tools, when set down on the soil, would hum faintly for several seconds afterward. One laborer described the sensation as standing over an underground current. His supervisor dismissed it as magnetic interference, but ordered the crew not to linger after dark. A few months later, a visiting journalist named Clara Main began work on what she called Britain's Forgotten Convoys. In her drafts, she cited numerous wartime rail mysteries, among them the German lost train, drawing particular comparison to the Blackridge case. If Trobitz was a tragedy discovered, she wrote, then Blackridge is its reflection buried alive. Main interviewed former railway staff and local elders, piecing together fragments from half a century of rumour. One elderly porter, confined to a nursing home, recalled hearing a whistle without smoke in 1944. 3 short notes, repeated every night for a week. Another witness, a farmer's widow, claimed she saw soldiers laying down fresh track across a field that no longer exists on any modern map. While compiling her article, Main received an unmarked parcel. Inside was a reel of audio tape labeled simply 47B, maintenance log. The recording was damaged, filled with static and low-frequency thuds. But at the 2-minute mark, a distinct voice could be heard muttering, "Still moving, still counting." She had it analyzed by a sound technician who confirmed the voice belonged to a man, possibly middle-aged, speaking through heavy distortion. The technician quit the project the following day. Main's finished manuscript was never published. Colleagues said she grew reclusive, convinced her phones were being tapped. When she finally moved abroad, she left behind her notes in a sealed box marked Blackridge Material. Do not disturb. The box was later misplaced during archive relocation, and no one has seen it since. In 1992, a maintenance crew repairing a nearby highway reported seeing light flickering beneath the ground at the edge of the restricted zone. One described it as lanterns passing slowly in sequence as if on a timetable. The Ministry of Transport dismissed the claim, citing swamp gas and stress fatigue, but the workers refused to return. Even now, the forest that reclaimed Blackridge grows unevenly, trees twisting at strange angles above what used to be the trackbed, their roots curling over iron that will not rust. Locals claim that on quiet nights, the soil vibrates faintly, and if you listen closely enough, you can hear a steady pulse counting up to 47. And then silence. By 1993, whispers of reopening the area for environmental study surfaced briefly in Parliament, but were quickly dismissed. The official reason was cost. Unofficially, a few civil servants hinted that there were anomalies best left untouched. Among those who protested the closure was Dr. Harold Eames, a historian of wartime logistics. He had long argued that the Blackridge case was the missing paragraph in Britain's wartime record. Eames devoted his final years to assembling a definitive chronology of the 1944 disappearance. Using declassified files, he reconstructed shipping manifests, personnel rosters, and railway orders, all except one, Train 47B. That entry appeared in no surviving timetable. "Every other train that month has a destination," he told the BBC in a rare interview. Only this one ends mid-sentence. During his research, Eames revisited the notes of Dr. Hesterman, Lydia Romer and Merin Voss, finding a common thread in their references to the lost train from Trobitz. He noted how both cases shared the bureaucratic void, the gap between issuance and arrival, and how erasure itself became the mechanism of secrecy. Trobitz teaches us that disappearance is a method, not a mystery, he said. Blackridge is that method perfected. Late that same year, Eames received permission to inspect the sealed ministry annex rumored to hold the final rail ledgers. He entered with 2 assistants. Only one returned. The surviving aide, Richard Holst, later testified that the vault lights flickered continuously, and that the deeper we went, the more we heard it, metal sliding against metal, as if some unseen engine were idling in the dark. Holst claimed they located a single cabinet marked 47B, closed case. Inside were brittle sheets of paper fused together by heat. The top page bore one surviving stamp, "Manifest complete, do not resubmit." When he turned to call for Eames, the man was gone. His torch lay on the floor, still burning. Holst fled the site immediately. No trace of Eames was ever found. The ministry's statement called his disappearance a tragic accident involving unstable flooring. Yet the internal inspection that followed found no structural faults. The annex was sealed permanently afterward. In the years that followed, independent researchers sought to verify Holst's account, but were denied access. The few who persisted noticed something odd. Eames's name was quietly removed from several university directories, and his published works on logistics ceased circulation. It was as though his contributions had been deliberately excised. Holst, in a letter before leaving the country, wrote one final line. "The Blackridge train is still in motion. Only the world around it has stopped. Those who've stood near the valley since claim that, on windless nights, the air itself seems to tremble, as though something vast beneath the surface exhales once, softly in memory of the 47 who never arrived." By 1994, exactly 50 years after the disappearance of the Blackridge transport, a quiet memorial was proposed by a group of railway veterans and local historians. They wished to erect a simple stone marker at the old junction. Nothing political. Only a plaque reading, "To the 47 lost, whose journey ended nowhere." The request was denied by the Ministry of Defense, which still classified the valley as a sensitive research perimeter. Yet that summer, a handful of villagers gathered near the overgrown embankment anyway. Among them was Joseph Ellery, now an old man, one of the last living witnesses of the 1944 night. With trembling hands, he placed a small lantern on the ground and whispered, "They never came home, but the rails still wait for them." His granddaughter recalled later that the flame flickered unnaturally, as if disturbed by a draught from beneath the soil. Around the same period, the British Historical Society published a reflective piece marking the anniversary. It mentioned the lost train of Trobitz, using it as a factual counterpoint. An event documented, photographed, mourned. The article concluded, "For every tragedy remembered, another remains buried under bureaucracy." Though the author never named Blackridge directly, readers in the know understood the reference immediately. That autumn, meteorological reports recorded a series of minor tremors, localized solely within the valley, small, rhythmic vibrations occurring at night between 2 and 2:20 a.m. Seismologists dismissed them as mechanical interference, but the data showed the tremors repeating precisely 47 times before fading. The pattern never recurred again. A young geologist, Nadia Trent, who studied those readings, noted something chilling in her report. The frequency mirrors that of mid-century freight engines operating under partial steam. When she attempted to publish her findings, her paper was rejected for insufficient data verification. Within a year, she emigrated and never returned to academia. Meanwhile, the forest that had reclaimed the tracks continued to shift. Storms exposed rusted beams, sometimes in parallel lines, before burying them again under mud and roots. Each re-emergence seemed to alter slightly. The alignment curved differently, as though the land itself were redrawing its past. Locals said that every August, the month of the original disappearance, a faint metallic scent filled the air. Old-timers would stay indoors, claiming the wind carried iron breath. Younger hikers who ignored the warnings often returned uneasy, describing sudden chills and the echo of distant whistles. One recorded sound captured during an amateur investigation was later analyzed by sound engineers. Beneath the wind, they identified a steady mechanical pulse measured at the same tempo as 1940 steam piston rhythm. Though the ministry has long denied any surviving records, the Blackridge Manifest remains whispered among archivists as a ghost file, occasionally glimpsed in catalogue indexes, then gone by morning. Scholars who've seen it say the description field contains only one word: ongoing. Even now, the valley lies silent under its blanket of moss and bracken, holding secrets that hum just below human hearing, proof perhaps that history doesn't die. It just keeps moving in circles. By early 1995, a group of postgraduate historians from Cambridge undertook what would become the last sanctioned visit to the Blackridge site. They had secured temporary clearance under the pretext of studying post-industrial soil reclamation. Among them was Eleanor Morel, who had written her thesis on European prisoner transports and had long been fascinated by the parallels between the vanished Blackridge train and the lost train of Tröbitz. In her field diary, Morel described a valley of unnatural quiet. No birds, no insects, just a low vibration that hums at the edge of hearing. The team established base at the edge of the fenced perimeter and began taking soil and mineral readings. On the third night, Morel recorded a series of faint metallic clicks picked up by their microphones, 47 pulses spaced evenly apart. She wrote, "If this is coincidence, it's one written with purpose." At dawn, one of her assistants, Caleb Rowe, found a fragment of paper protruding from the earth, brittle but legible. It appeared to be a torn page from a ledger bearing the title Transport Record 47B and the partial phrase Disembarked, Location Redacted. The ink was fresh, as though printed only days before. The team secured the artifact for study, but that evening when they opened the specimen box, the page had turned entirely black, its text burned away. Later, during an on-site review, the group heard what Morel described as steam hissing from nowhere. Their instruments registered no change in pressure or temperature, yet the sound persisted for almost a full minute before ceasing. When they replayed the audio, the hiss was gone, replaced by a faint murmur, a man's voice counting under his breath. 46, 47. After returning to Cambridge, Morel compiled her findings into a confidential report titled Manifest Without a Rival. In it, she wrote, "Blackridge stands as the echo of bureaucratic extinction, the vanishing of people through the machinery that recorded them. The lost train had survivors to bear witness. Blackridge has only recurrence." The report circulated briefly within academic circles before being withdrawn pending verification. A single excerpt remains quoted in a later anthology. Perhaps the train did arrive. Perhaps it still arrives over and over, in the same hour it left. Shortly after the study concluded, the government revoked all remaining access permits to the region. The valley was reclassified as a protected site under the Environmental Preservation Act. Its coordinates omitted from public registries. Satellite surveys in 1996 showed a faint linear depression consistent with buried infrastructure, but later imagery mysteriously blurred that area. Eleanor Morel never returned to fieldwork. In her last recorded interview, she reflected softly, "Tröbitz gave us closure. Blackridge refuses to close. It's the difference between a grave and a wound." Every August since then, locals claim the ground beneath the old junction still trembles for a few minutes after midnight, and the mist settles in straight lines, as though tracing invisible rails waiting to be followed. The last mention of Blackridge in any public record appeared in 1997, within a brief geological survey describing minor subterranean shifts consistent with hollow structural collapse. The report was withdrawn days later, replaced by a sanitized version omitting all coordinates. Yet those who had seen the original draft swore that its closing paragraph contained a cryptic note. Resonant frequency unchanged since 1944, 47 pulses per cycle. By the turn of the millennium, the valley had faded completely from national memory. The road leading there no longer appeared on maps. Its signposts had been removed, its station house reduced to rubble swallowed by vines. Still, the legends persisted in nearby villages, stories told in low voices about the train that never cooled, the whistle that never faded. Old men would point toward the woods and mutter, It's still down there, running on its own time. In 1999, a young historian named Patrick Hale uncovered a misplaced film reel while cataloguing ministry archives. It was labeled simply Blackridge footage, 1945, unreleased. When he played it, the reel showed a static image of an empty railway platform, motionless for nearly a minute. Then, faintly in the far distance, a single shape appeared, black, narrow, gleaming under fog. The camera shuddered. The last frame showed the numbers 4 and 7 chalked onto a metal door before the film abruptly cut to white. Hale turned the reel over to his supervisor. Within weeks, both he and the footage vanished from records. Scholars since have likened the Blackridge mystery to an echo of the lost train, an archival ghost that refuses resolution. The Trobits tragedy left survivors, names, graves. Blackridge left only absence. As one historian later wrote, it is a story of motion without arrival, memory without witnesses. Today, the forest that covers the valley stands unnaturally still. Moss has overgrown the last surviving marker, a warped piece of rail twisted into a half-circle. When wind passes through the hollow, it produces a sound halfway between a sigh and a whistle. Those who have heard it say it lasts exactly 47 seconds. On the darkest nights, some locals swear they see a dim amber light moving through the trees, steady, deliberate, the way a lantern swings from a slow train car. They say it fades toward the north, where the old track once climbed the ridge before vanishing into earth. Others say the ground hums softly afterward, as though something beneath is waiting for permission to move again. No excavation has ever been permitted. No memorial has ever been built. Blackridge remains an omission on the map, a wound carefully bandaged by time and silence. And sometimes when the mist thickens and the valley holds its breath, those who stand there claim to hear a low voice counting, patient and mechanical. 45. 46. 47. Then, as always, nothing. Just the echo of a journey that never ends.